top of this bulletin, we're tracking some breaking inputs from the United States of America, where Joe Biden on Sunday had dropped out of the US presidential election and endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic Party's new nominee. Now, Biden, 81 years old, said he was acting in the best interest of my party and the country by bowing to weeks of pressure after a disastrous June debate against Donald Trump stoked worries about his age and his mental fitness. These are the latest inputs that we are tracking at this point of time, where US President Joe Biden has already dropped out of the US presidential election on Sunday morning and now has endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic Party's new nominee. Now, joining us on the broadcast is our colleague with more details on this. A very good morning, Akanksha. How does this Biden's exit impact the Democratic Party's chances in general elections, with Kamala Harris as the front runner now?
Absolutely, Kuhina. Very good morning to all our viewers over here. Now, remember, this has just right now added new dimensions to the entire presidential race. The developments that you've just shared with our viewers and have taken place in the United States Sunday. You know, this was on expected lines, but many would say it was not on expected lines, considering just a couple of days ago, the US president had sort of established that he is not going anywhere. But, you know, the calls from within his own party were getting burgeoning for him, which is why this is a decision that he's made. And of course, he's also been duly appreciated for it by the likes of senior Democrats like Nancy Pelosi or even the former US President Barack Obama, who have endorsed his decision. And now, since you're talking about how this will impact the race, well, this is going to have manifold impact, because if you look at it from within the Democrat Party, now the focus is going to be about whether they will be anointing Kamala Harris as the only candidate. There are only two ways to go about it. Either they anoint Kamala Harris as the successor to Joe Biden as the presidential nominee for the Democrats, or they conduct sanctioned forums across the United States, where these forums are also moderated and people are, in fact, the Democrats are allowed to choose their candidate. Remember, there are a host of governors. You have the California governor, you have the Michigan governor, you have the Pennsylvania governor, who either could, in fact, be standing opposite to Kamala Harris in this entire competition, or maybe if Kamala Harris is anointed as the presidential pick, they may just then be in the race for the VP pick, because remember, now the focus also shifts on who will be the vice presidential candidate. To give you a bit of a brief about how this will impact the race against Donald Trump, who, as we all know, last week has been chosen as the final nominee for the GOP during the RNC. The Democratic National Convention is, of course, going to spell out a lot, which is happening in August. But having said that, we already have seen Kamala Harris, in fact, fight on for the vice presidential race. She's somebody who already has been part of an entire campaign as far as Biden Harris are concerned. The funding apparatus is very much going to be behind her. She is someone who already has a national vision because of her VP credentials. And if the United States opts for her, remember, they'll not just be voting for their first lady president, they will also be voting for a president, first lady president of color.
Right, Akanksha, with Joe Biden dropping out of the presidential race, now it is actually Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris, according to the adding new dimensions like what you mentioned. But will President Biden's decision to drop out of the race lead to a surge in support for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump for the Republicans?
Kuhina, important to highlight that, right now, they are not even treating Kamala Harris as a threat to the entire presidential race, because a very interesting point that has now emerged out of this entire decision of Joe Biden's is the fact that he's the first US president to not be standing for re-election since the 1970s, to be precise, 1968. And we've already seen, in fact, the House Speaker. As we all know, the Republicans are in a full majority in the House. We've seen how Mike Johnson's already started for calls that if Joe Biden is not fit enough to fight for elections in the upcoming presidential race? Is he even fit enough to continue with the remainder part of his presidency term? That is the big question right now that is being addressed, or the big point of attack that is now shaping up for the Republicans. We've already heard Donald Trump's VP pick, J.D. Vance, raise this issue, that is he even fit enough to continue for the remainder part of his tenure till November period. So do expect the Grand Old Party to now increase its chorus in terms of their demand for Joe Biden to step down.
Right, Akanksha, I'll request you to stay with us on the broadcast as we are being joined by foreign affairs expert Robinder Sachdev. A very good morning, Mr. Sachdev. Thank you for speaking to CNN News 18. Well, how do you think President Biden's withdrawal from the presidential race will be perceived by the international leaders and allies, especially at a time when it is now Trump versus likely Kamala Harris in the run-up for the White House?
Thank you. Interesting question. How it will be perceived by the international leaders? I think international leaders do not have much deeper understanding of the way the American election system works. So several people may be a little bit surprised at how come this happened. But also maybe there is some relief everywhere within America also that this situation was heading to be one wherein Biden seemed untenable to continue as a candidate. So now as to what happens when the elections happen is a separate matter. So that is one overall. But secondly, yes, the fact that Kamala Harris will be the candidate is, people, I think there's much to appreciate about the American system of democracy or, American democracy to say, that a woman, a black woman, an immigrant, the daughter of immigrants, can rise to this position and be the candidate is something, commendable for the American democracy.
Right, Mr. Sachdev, thank you so much for speaking to us. Well, now more on Biden's dropping out of the presidential race in this CNN report. Let's take a look.